My name's Brad Young, and welcome to the Peak Performance Podcast. Today's episode 24, the Green Berets, Masters of Mental Resilience. And so, like every episode of the Peak Performance Podcast, in the podcast description, you're going to find a link to a site that I make for every single podcast, and you'll be able to, you'll be able to practically apply and utilize the information we talk about today. But we're going to look at the mental and physical resilience of the Green Berets. We're going to examine their selection process, training regimen, and psychological techniques that enable them to perform in the world's most challenging environments. The legacy of the Green Berets. They started in 1952, but their roots go back to World War II. They got their name from the Green Beret hats they wear. These elite soldiers handle special missions like unconventional warfare, defending other countries, gathering intelligence, and direct combat. A multifaceted mission. And so I spoke with a former Green Beret not too long ago, and he didn't tell me he was a Green Beret until the end. But I talked to him for a while. I like to get him on the podcast, but he was talking about all the things he had to do, learn other languages, blend in with the local community, train soldiers, all these things that we're fixing to talk about. But it was unconventional warfare, working with resistance movements in enemy-controlled territory. So you're very vulnerable at that point. You're outnumbered by a significant amount no matter what you're doing. And so so this is where the mental resilience is going to be paramount. Foreign internal defense, they train allied nations' military forces. And he talked about that. He didn't tell me where, obviously, but he talked about doing that, learning languages, being able to blend in. And they do special recon, which, is gathering intelligence in hostile environments. And, he talked about growing the beards out and, blending in, in different areas. It was quite interesting, when he was telling me about it, the detail that he got to about, how hard it was to remain unnoticeable and blend in with a local environment. But that's what they have to do. I mean, their mental resilience is unbelievable. Direct action, they do short duration strikes and raids. They operate in a 12-man operational detachment alpha, ODA, and each soldier there is cross-trained in multiple specialties that, where they have a primary expertise such as weapons, engineering, medicine, or communications, which, since they're cross-trained, they learn, a little bit about everything. And so it makes, a lot of companies and a lot of people need to understand this because, when you get cross-trained in weapons, in engineering, medicine, and communications, a little bit about everything. You have people that are special operators there that do that, but you learn and understand. And so it makes that small unit way more effective than a much larger force. And you do the same thing with your company. The best companies that I worked for back years ago would cross-train. They would empower their workers and they would cross-train. You'd have people that, had certain skills and you pair them up together and you all work together and you learn about each other, about what you did, about what, about their jobs, about their specialty, how they, where they would get a good blend of engineering, et cetera, for that sale. And it made all the difference in the effectiveness. So when you look at the Special Forces selection, the Special Forces Assessment and Selection, the SFAS, is a 24-day course that Green Berets have to go through. They work to identify candidates with the right combination of mental, physical, and character attributes. The attrition rate is 60 to 70%. So you're going to lose 30 to 40% during the selection process. But they are deliberately, subjected to sleep deprivation, caloric restriction, psychological stress, and physical exhaustion while being continuously evaluated on their leadership potential, their teamwork abilities, and problem-solving skills. The instructors will reveal minimal about the upcoming events, and so everything is new, and so that helps them increase their adaptability. So when we look at, mental resilience, think about this. I mean, we can do things when we've got plenty of sleep, we eat enough, we're not under a lot of stress, and we're not physically exhausted. But when you have all four of those things happening at one time, it shows who you really are. It breaks everything down to where you have to figure out who you are. And so that's why they are special operators. All right, the physical standards. All right, so you got the Army physical fitness test, which is, the special operators have to score way higher than these numbers, but to be competitive. But the minimum standards: 49 push-ups in 2 minutes, 59 sit-ups in 2 minutes, 2 miles in 15:12. But competitive candidates, they have to far exceed those minimums. They have ruck marches, and they have forced ruck marches with 40 to 70 pounds, anywhere from 15 to 30 miles, and that will definitely physically wear you out doing that 30 miles a day. Land navigation, they have to find points in unfamiliar, often densely wooded terrain using only a map and a compass day and night. Water confidence, they got to demonstrate swimming proficiency and comfort in water while wearing uniform and equipment. I mean, these requirements are demanding, but they are just a baseline. The true challenge, lies in performing tasks when you're exhausted, hungry, and under extreme pressure. And that's why they are the Green Berets. Army Combat Fitness Test. And so Special Forces candidates must excel in the Army Combat Fitness Test, which is better assesses their combat relevant physical capabilities. There's 6 events, the three repetition maximum deadlift. And so it's 3 reps, 340 is the max. And so you need to be real close to that max. And you're doing it 3 times. And so if you fail at 2, your previous score stands. Standing power throw, you're throwing a 10-pound medicine ball over your back, over your head, to your back. Hand release push-ups, which is, hand release push-ups are different than regular push-ups because you go down to the bottom, you raise your hands up for just a brief second, both hands, and then you push up. Then you go back down. And so, you're not able to get momentum and just, keep pounding out push-ups. You've got to stop with each one and make each rep count. Sprint, drag, carry. You sprint with a weighted sled. You do a lateral shuffle, kettlebell carry, and then a leg tuck or a plank. A plank, we know what it is. And a competitive score is going to be pretty long time on the plank. The leg tuck. What the leg tuck is, it's a pull-up, basically a pull-up to where your knees touch your elbows. Essentially, stand under a bar. And let's say you take your left and right arm, hand, and then you put them in different separate directions for a neutral grip. And so you have each hand going in a different direction. You pull up, you pull your knees up, and you touch your elbows. And the max score on that's 20. And so I would think you need to be at a 20 level. And then you do the 2-mile run. And so, the Special Forces candidates, are going to have to score in the highest performance tier to demonstrate their strength to weight ratio, their power, their muscular endurance, and their cardio fitness. Physical preparations for real-world operations. Operational relevance. Physical standards, required because, they directly correlate with mission requirements. The ability to move long distances on foot with heavy equipment allows teams to infiltrate hostile territories undetected. Your upper body strength helps you climb, carry wounded teammates, and handle heavy weapons. Your cardiovascular endurance sustains the performance. Injury performance. Beyond performance enhancement, physical preparation serves as injury prevention. Special operators often take place in tough environments that are way away from any medical facilities. So the physical resilience developed during the training hours helps them withstand the cumulative strength of carrying heavy loads through difficult terrain, reducing the likelihood of mission compromising injuries, and helps extend their operational longevity. When you think about, the integration of strength, endurance, mobility, and durability, these operators have to have this to be able to make it because you're going high mountain altitudes, dense jungles, desert terrain, and urban settings. Beyond the strength of cognitive assessment and selection, and, it's equally as important. You need to be able to think clearly under extreme stress. And so that's why during their selection, they have a bunch of problem-solving events designed to assess mental processing under suboptimal conditions. Candidates undergo intelligence testing covering mathematical reasoning, spatial awareness, pattern recognition, and language aptitude. These assessments identify individuals, with cognitive flexibility that are required for these complex scenarios that Green Berets encounter on a regular basis. Green Berets have to do more than just fight. They have to have mental resilience. They have to understand, and that's from having limited information, limited resources, so you have to think really critically to be able to adapt. Psychological evaluation, the hidden dimension, team orientation, the ability to subordinate personal interest to help the team succeed and accomplish the mission, a balance between leadership and followership. Contribution without recognition. I wish people would understand that more in depth. You can contribute something without getting recognized for it every time. Stress tolerance. When you have sleep deprivation, that's extreme stress, and you got to be able to continue to think under extreme stress when you're tired, when you're hungry. And then adaptability, it's, flexibility when it comes to changing conditions or unexpected obstacles. Got to get creative with your resources and tactical improvisation. You got to be able to improvise quickly. The selection environment is designed for psychological stress. The environment itself serves as a sophisticated psychological assessment tool. Instruction is purposefully minimal, creating uncertainty that reveals how candidates respond to stress. Constantly changing performance standards and seemingly arbitrary rules test their adaptability. Team tasks with deliberately inefficient resources to evaluate problem-solving skills. And that happens all the time, When you think about it, work life, personal life, sometimes people give you tasks with not enough resources to see how you can problem solve and get creative. And then probably the most important selection criteria is how candidates handle failure. And, this has everything to do with mental resilience. It's the ability to persist after setbacks, failures, maintain your effort and positive attitude despite the pain, exhaustion, perceived unfairness, and be able, that provides a critical insight to the psychological resilience. This quality more than any other predicts success in training and operational environments. How you persist, how you suck it up after, you get, you have pain, you get exhausted. You don't think something's not fair because the whole world, all I hear is people whine and cry about everything's not fair to them. And, they can't handle any pain. They don't, work when, they're exhausted. Some of my best memories are when I was the most exhausted, sleep 2 or 3 hours, fly across the country, sleep a minimal amount, get up, and work all day and night. For a couple days, that's, you're physically drained, you're exhausted, everything hurts and you feel awful, but there's a reward, I love doing that. It was just something I love doing. For me, it was just such a rush. And so, that's being adaptable because too many people, they want a 9 to 5 or whatever. And so if you 9 to 5, you'll always 9 to 5. That's what this is telling you. If you go outside and you work hard and you keep going, you figure out, you're more adaptable than you think you are. You can work, against that physical pain. You can work through the exhaustion. And, if something's not fair, suck it up. Life's not fair. It's truly not fair at all. But that doesn't matter. If you keep working, you're going to continue to grow. The qualification course, Forging the Green Beret. And so you got your phase 1, your special forces prep, physical conditioning. We talked about this earlier, land navigation and your introductory skills. Phase 2, language and culture, intensive foreign language training and cultural immersion. It's so funny, people don't want to learn more languages or understand other cultures, and that's the opposite here. That's your phase 2, and that's something that the Green Beret taught me about. He talked about all the languages that he had to learn, which was an extensive amount, all the stuff that he, had done. And it was amazing, learning all those languages, learning about those cultures and how not to stand out and what to do. It was such a pleasure. I'm going to have to get in touch with him and try to get him on the Peak Performance podcast. Phase 3, small unit tactics, advanced combat skills, mission planning, and field craft. Getting, field craft, you're crafting things in the field. You're getting adaptable. You're understanding things more. And then phase 4, military occupational specialty. You get your specialized training in weapons, engineering, medicine, or communications. And then phase 5, unconventional warfare. You take everything and put it together. And I mean, that's, when we look at this, we can use this for team building. When you're looking at, are they physically ready? Because there's too many people, out in the workforce. They have poor physical conditioning. So that's going to tell you something about their mental conditioning a lot of times. And then, language and culture, can they immerse into your culture? Are they going to be willing to come into your organization and learn the language? Because like all companies have certain jargon. They're going to be able to immerse, or they're going to try to buck everything and, and not work with your culture. And then are they going to train more? Are you going to, special unit tactics, are they going to learn new skills? They're going to grow. And then are they going to work on a specialization? Because a lot of times people get out of college or they get out in the workforce and they don't have any specialty. They don't want one. They just do whatever. Now, here is a good example. And then your unconventional warfare, take everything and put it together. Get creative. That's what this is all about, mental resilience and being creative and adaptable. And then the Robin stage. This is the culmination of the everything together. It's a multi-week unconventional warfare scenario conducted across rural North Carolina. The immersive exercise places students in Pineland, a fictional country where they must build rapport with the local resistance, and that's usually played by civilian volunteers, and organize them into an effective fighting force against an oppressive government. Wow. That is a absolute unbelievable test right there. And so the Robin Sage integrates every aspect of their training. High stress, sleep deprived environment that constantly simulates real war missions. They must apply language skills, cultural awareness, tactical expertise, and advanced planning while demonstrating the mental resilience to apply to rapidly changing conditions with minimal support. How many people do you know that are actually supporting, that take care of themselves 100%? Not too many. Are they able to adapt and be able to do that? No. Mental resilience techniques, stress. So progressive exposure, Green Beret training employs stress inoculation, systematic exposure to increasingly difficult challenges in controlled environments. This progressive approach builds psychological calluses, similar to how physical training builds muscle. By repeatedly facing and overcoming stressful situations, operators develop confidence. Stress response management, candidates learn to recognize their individual stress responses and implement tactical breathing techniques to regulate physiological arousal. Combat breathing, a pattern of 4-count inhale, 4-count hold, 4-count exhale, 4-count hold, activates the nervous system, reduces your heart rate, improves cognitive function during high stress scenarios. So again, we'll do that. We're going to do 4-count inhale, 4-count hold, 4 count exhale, 4 count hold. A lot we can apply from this. The power of visualization in Special Forces training. They regularly force operators to visualize techniques to enhance their performance under pressure. Before executing high-risk operations, they mentally rehearse each phase of the mission in precise detail, imagining both successful execution and potential complications requiring them to adapt. The mental rehearsal serves as a critical function. It strengthens their memory for critical thinking skills. It reduces performance anxiety because they've seen it, happen all these times. It familiarizes them with failure and prepares them to adapt. Research in performance psychology confirms that visualization activates many of the same neural pathways as physical practice, effectively creating a mental blueprint that remains accessible even under extreme stress with conscious cognitive processing that is compromised. So, when we step back and look at that, you're getting, you're rehearsing this through your mind, and the more you rehearse it, the better you get at it. It's the same thing as practice. And so you're ready when you actually need it. These are amazing things. And so the mental frame for goal setting hierarchy, you've got the ultimate purpose, to service the nation and team. You got the mission objective, tactical outcomes to be achieved. You process milestones, intermediate achievements and checkpoints. And present actions, immediate focus on the current task. And that's a nice goal setting hierarchy there. You got your present actions, and and when I think about this is when you think about it for your career, your personal life, you handle be present. You handle the present things right now. You process these milestones. You achieve them, and they're checkpoints. It's like setting, small goals that are achievable goals where you can process it, go through it. Okay, you gain confidence. Your mission objective. It's a tactical outcome that's to be achieved. And so whatever, the goals of your division are, and then the ultimate purpose is your company. And so you think about that from, many stretches. And so when we look at the Stoic mindset, controlling the controllables. And so as we're thinking about mental resilience, we think about focusing on influence, concentrating your mental energy exclusively on factors that are within your control. When you focus on what you can control, you get things done. Emotional regulation, recognizing emotions without being able to govern by them. And I talk to people about this all the time, because I have to watch it myself. I never want to make a decision when I'm emotional. I don't want to do that. I want to make sure that you make a decision based on logic. And so you got to be able to regulate yourself. Too many people make emotional decisions, but this is where Stoic mindset can teach you emotional regulation, which is part of their training as well. And then, present moment orientation, maintaining attention to what's right here in front of you. You can't look at your failures and your past anxieties. You got to look at it this moment right now. Lessons from captivity, survival and resistance. Maintain mental discipline, creating daily routines and mental challenges to preserve psychological structure during captivity. We have to do that as people. You have to do that, your career, your job, maintain mental discipline. When you have a daily routine, it's kind of like, my change, habits, everything in your habits is what you do. That's why I write everything down. Number 2, establish communication networks. You develop covert methods to maintain contact with fellow prisoners, preserving unit integrity. Resist exploitation, employing psychological techniques to withstand interrogation while revealing mental information. Something else, when they're captured, they got to maintain mental discipline, establish communication, and resist exploitation, because that's got to be one of the hardest things when you're getting tortured. to be able to, to not, to give up just minimal information. Maintain physical conditioning, engage in concealed exercise regimens, and this all makes sense. I mean, if you're captured, I mean, you need to be able to, because you've got to be in physical condition to be able for a potential escape. Because if you just sit there and let your muscles atrophy and you don't work your lungs or anything, I mean, how are you going to be able to get anywhere? But special forces operators receive specialized training in survival, evasion, resistance, and escape, SEER. And I've heard people talk about this in, different shows. I mean, and talk about it. And it's, I seen one episode and it was really interesting, being able to survive, evade, resist, and escape. I mean, it was very interesting watching the way they took off those cuffs and they did these things. And so, but the psychological preparation is the ultimate test of mental resilience, maintaining personal integrity and operational security despite isolation, deprivation, and coercion. But these lessons from this training go way beyond the military application. It offers profound insights to the human capacity for enduring things under extreme adversity. And these are things that, this is your foundational, this is foundation of your mental resilience. I mean, if you don't have a daily routine, how are you going to be able to make it? How are you going to be able to stay organized? If you don't have communication networks, how are you going to be able to keep, integrity and keep everybody together? How are you going to resist exploitation? I mean, how, they learn all these things. I mean, how are you going to maintain physical conditioning without anybody knowing? So when we apply the Special Forces mental resilience to civilian life, this is a last section. But the tools developed by the Green Berets have powerful applications beyond the battlefield. Civilians facing personal or professional challenge can adapt to modified versions of these mental resilience techniques to enhance their performance and well-being. The Special Forces approach to goal setting, it's breaking seemingly impossible objectives into manageable components. And I talk about this all the time. I mean, we got to break everything down into small things. It's just like making this podcast today. These always take several takes because when I do the Peak Performance podcast, there's a lot to them. It's not, just a simple thing from one of my books or something. I mean, this is highly researched information, and I have to make a practical application for everything that I do. And so, when you think about, being able to handle stress, how you can, prepare for situations like public speaking, having the disciplined optimism cultivated in the military special operations provides a template for maintaining constructive attitudes despite setbacks in your personal or business endeavors. And the most importantly, I mean, the emphasis on teamwork and mutual support reminds us that connecting with others could be our greatest source of resilience across all life. And when we think about this, you have to, be able to handle stress. And, my first public speaking event, I got so nervous, I knocked one of my contacts out and left. I knew what I was going to say, but I just couldn't say it. I already had it rehearsed, but I didn't train enough. I didn't practice. I didn't visualize what I was doing. Now, when I go in somewhere, I'm visualizing, I'm practicing. I know what I'm talking about. I'm ready, but then I wasn't, and it's, you have to learn these techniques over time, having that optimism despite failing, in your personal life and business, that's the obstacles that are in the way, I mean, you're going to fail. But it's how you handle that failure that's going to be everything. And so when we look at this as a whole, I mean, the obstacle becomes the way, and we're all going to fail. You're all going to fail, but you can utilize these techniques to help with your personal mental resilience, and at the same time, work on your your physical fitness. And all the other things that we mentioned in there, cross-training, all the things, because you can take the concepts of how the Green Berets work as a team and everything they do and really make it into something special for yourself. And so, again, in the podcast description, there's going to be a link you can follow. It's going to have this presentation in it. It's also going to have practical applications for it, to where you can take and utilize the concepts from this in a worksheet. It's going to really, help you think about it and how you can practically apply, being able to get past these obstacles, because, mental resilience is something that most people fail at. They quit as soon as something doesn't go right. They have a bad moment, they quit. And I've had days like that. Where if it just started off really bad, would be gone for hours. But I figured out ways to handle it and do better, and to be able to, to go through these things from a different angle. But we all have to do it because we all want to be, peak performers. And when we look at the Green Berets and we look at the foundation of what they do and how they do it, how they combine their physical and mental resilience and toughness, along with their character, their cross training, everything, we could, utilize the same thing for teamwork and several other things that I'm probably going to do it, in podcasts to come, because this is a unit like no other. But anyway, my name is Brad Young. This has been the Peak Performance Podcast. Thank you and have a great day.